Well, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone to a conversation of Black Domers, a book that details the experiences of African American students at Notre Dame in their own words. And we have some absolutely wonderful essayists from our book, and we'll get to them in a moment. But let me introduce myself first, and then the other co-editor of Black Domers, if he could make his introduction. I'm David Krashna. I'm a 1971 graduate of the University of Notre Dame. I live in Oakland, California, amidst the bad air quality and the wildfires, but I'm blessed that we have not been severely impacted by them, and we pray for those who have been more severely impacted. Don, who are you?
I am Don Wycliff, class of 1969, co-editor of Black Domers and a resident of South Bend, where the weather is just a bit cloudy, but quite salubrious, actually. My vocabulary word for the day.
Okay. That's because you're an award-winning journalist. That's why. All right.
No.
Well, we have with us a 1980 graduate of the University of Notre Dame, and that's Phyllis Washington Stone. And hello, Phyllis. Good to have you with us.
Hello, and it's good to be here. And I apologize that I'm driving, but I'm here in New Jersey, and it's partly sunny, partly cloudy.
All right. Well, life continues, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
All right. We also have Kevin Hawkins, 1981 graduate. And Kevin, I'd be remiss without at least saying the name of my friend, our friend, your father, Tom Hawkins. So welcome, Kevin, here today. And we look forward to hearing your story, the truth, not so much a story, but the truth of your experience at the University of Notre Dame.
Thank you so much. And thank you for mentioning Dad. It's been 3 years he's been gone now, but I know that he was extremely touched and honored to be included in Black Domers. And when you all asked me to contribute as well, I was very touched also. So to have that experience with my father and I both being blessed to have an essay in the book is tremendous. And greetings to everyone from salubrious South Bend.
And we're blessed to have you. Margret LaChapelle Sonnier, welcome from Houston, Texas. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here.
And Margret, I recently saw the New York City Alumni Club presentation. Is that your sister who was the moderator?
Yes, Juliet.
Juliet, okay. So we're going to hear a lot more from you. And let's see, we're ready to start the official program. And Don, before
you left out Lisa.
Oh, Lisa. Lisa, how could I leave you out? I'll tell you, Lisa, we're so pleased to have you because we couldn't find you. You had moved from one employment to the other. You were with Disney, and now you're with Netflix.
So, I'm with Netflix now, yes.
So pleased to have you. Thank you. And you're originally from Sumter, South Carolina, and we're going to hear a lot more about you. And you met Phyllis at the University of Notre Dame, did you not?
I did. I met Phyllis when I was in 12th grade, and I came to visit Notre Dame. It was during Antostal, I remember that. And Phyllis was working for the admissions office at the time. She'd already graduated, and what showed me all around campus and introduced me to wonderful friends, and that really influenced my decision to come to Notre Dame.
And your favorite place at Notre Dame is the grotto?
Definitely. I have so many fond memories of praying there and just going there for peace. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for being with us. Don, what were the 1980s like throughout the world, our nation, and at Notre Dame?
Oh, well, very briefly.
Okay.
1980s were a decade of particular change at Notre Dame because Father Hesburghs retired after 35 years as president, and Monk Malloy became president. From a student perspective, a Black student perspective, Tim Brown became Notre Dame's 7th Heisman Trophy winner and the first Black Heisman Trophy winner. Tony Rice led the team football team to a national championship in '88. And on a larger scale, the end of the Cold War came at the end of the decade. Reagan, Gorbachev, those names were prominent. Lech Walesa, the Berlin Wall came down. So it was a consequential period, and we all lived through it.
And we're here.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Don, for that overview. And Phyllis, tell us about the truths of your experience as a student at Notre Dame, which included your being a cheerleader, and later on you were elected or selected for the Board of Trustees at the University of Notre Dame, and you're 20% Irish.
Yes. So that's from Ancestry.com. I didn't know when Ancestry.com first was put into place, but I was quick to do my DNA test, and that's what it came up with, 23% Irish.
Wow.
As I'm sure many of you are even more in terms of being Irish at heart, especially. But yes, I came to Notre Dame. I ended up there just a few years before Lisa, primarily because my mom and dad said, why not try Notre Dame? And I said, what's that and where is it? Turned out to be 90 minutes away. But yeah, I owe my claim to fame as a second Black cheerleader to the many people who stood up for me in protest back in the mid-1970s, 76, 77, and then ended up joining the Board of Trustees in 95. So a lot of history in between them, but in between those years, but yes.
Thank you, Phyllis. And there were 9 Black women at the time when you were at Notre Dame?
Yeah, there are about 9 of us. We were almost all in Lewis Hall, as I recall. There might have been a few in other places. I think Cheryl Rogers, who's the sister of Marty Rogers and a couple of other Rogers brothers, even before Marty, or before Cheryl. Cheryl might have been in Farley, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, but with the exception of just a couple of us, we were all in Lewis, and we were all a very tight-knit group. Yeah.
Thank you. And your cousin is Deacon Mel Tardy, is that right?
Yeah, so he's actually my husband's cousin.
Okay.
Mel's mom and my husband's mom were sisters. Mel's mom and my husband's mom were sisters.
Thank you, Phyllis. Now, Kevin, a 1981 graduate, and we've already indicated son of the first Black basketball American at the University of Notre Dame, Tom Hawkins. Kevin, would you, a sentence or two about this fellow you mentioned in your essay, Keith, in a wheelchair? If you could tell us a little bit more about him eventually, but more so, tell us about your experience, which included 3 years on the basketball team. Kevin?
Well, I think I had a really wonderful and unique experience because my first year there, although I tried out for the basketball team, there were no spots open for walk-ons then. So I was a student for the first year. And so being a student instead of a student athlete, I think I just had a great take at just being a person and not being seen as separate. And I was also in a unique situation where I went into Carroll Hall, which was the first time they had opened it up to undergrads. And so we were a dormitory of freshmen. So we had a great camaraderie, all of us late admits, getting into Carroll Hall, and it led to a great familial atmosphere being on campus there. And I was indoctrinated to Notre Dame, as you can imagine, at a very young age. I was going through some old pictures, and I'm a toddler with a V-necked ND letter sweater on that my father took lots of pictures. And He was always involved whenever Notre Dame came to Los Angeles, especially to play USC. We used to have a tradition of having a communion breakfast after the football game in Los Angeles. But I have to tell you that the story that really cemented Notre Dame in my heart was when we were watching a Notre Dame USC football game in the early 70s. And we had not beaten USC for a little bit. And it was great because Eric Pennick broke off this 85-yard run, I believe, and went for a touchdown. And I'm screaming and yelling next to Dad. And you know, you could hear Chris Schenkel, who was calling the games, if those of you that can remember way back when. And they panned the crowd and toilet paper rolls were flying and everybody was going crazy. And I look over at my dad and he's got his arms tight to his side and he had one of those skinny belts, right? And he was holding the skinny belt tight and tears are streaming down his face. And I get emotional talking about it because it's a very tender memory. But I said, Dad, why are you crying? We just scored a touchdown. We're winning the game. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, or not Dad, he said, son, it's Notre Dame. And I can't explain it to you other than that. It's just Notre Dame and it's in my heart.
Well, Keith, let's move a little forward in your essay and let's talk about your own experience watching a football game. Please tell us about that.
My own experience was almost, I'm fast forwarding, and Don, you mentioned Tim Brown, and there was that first night game that they had the lights at Notre Dame, and we're playing Michigan, and I'm with a bunch of friends. We're having a barbecue, a few cold malted beverages. We're in a celebratory mood, and they're going through the montage of Notre Dame history. And all of a sudden, I'm standing there with my friends, and I'm crying my eyes out. And my friends are looking at me, and they go, Hawk, what the heck is wrong? The game hasn't even started yet. And I looked around the room, and I said, it's Notre Dame, and I can't explain it to you. So wow. It was about a decade and a half right after. So automatically, I was transported back to that moment with my father.
Well, Keith, thanks for sharing that. And every time I read that essay and that scenario, I tear up myself just thinking about that. Thank you very much. Now, Margret, again, you're from Houston, and one of your majors and maybe a minor was Latin. I found that very interesting. Okay. And I think from reading your essay, I read it a couple of times just to be sure, you had a fairly good experience at Notre Dame. Tell us more about it. Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Margret.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So I just loved it. Actually, I think of it as 4 of the best years of my life. And, you know, it's become such a part of my life in terms of history and when I describe my college years. And actually, it's very similar to my high school years because I felt like it was just as small, just as intimate because of the groups. The Black Cultural Arts Council certainly played a big part in making me feel like I was welcome there. The Latin Club, well, there was no official Latin club, but Father Banas had a group of students who took Latin. It was a very small group. I would say maybe 8 students in the classes for the classical languages. And so we interacted a lot there. And then I had my friends from the dorm. I actually was in temporary housing at Lyons. So my parents were still trying to figure out how they were going to get the money together for me to go to Notre Dame. And it was a struggle for them. I had a full-paid scholarship to the Catholic University here in Houston, University of St. Thomas. So my father was not crazy about the idea, although he loved Notre Dame. But the idea of, you know, that expense, and we had 5 children in the family. So we were still trying to figure out how we were going to pay for it. And so I hadn't signed up for a dorm or anything. So I was a little late, a little behind. So they put me in basically what was, I guess, a study hall with 3 women. And so I was there for 3 weeks through the Black Cultural Arts Council, or the BCAC, I think was what we called it. I ended up meeting Joyce, who was kind of like my big sister. That was a program where she came in the first week, introduced herself, and then introduced me to Mert Perkins, who was in Lewis Hall. And of course, that's where a lot of the Black women were. And she encouraged me to try and find a room there. Just so happened there was a senior who needed a roommate. I wasn't crazy about that idea, but I got there and it was wonderful. She set down the rules. She said, I have a boyfriend. He comes over from time to time. I'll ask you to leave the room when he comes over. And so I understood the rules, and she really was like a big sister for me there. So I had so many people looking out for me at Notre Dame. And it was just a joyous experience for me. And I'll tell you, I was a little sad to hear that other people, especially some Black students, even some from my time, did not have as positive an experience. So.
Thank you, Margaret. And over the course of this shared read, we're going to hear about a number of those individuals, contributors to our book, that did not have a similar experience. And speaking of sisters, tell us a little bit about Sister Mark Edward Holm and her influence on you.
Oh, Sister Mark Edward was wonderful. I didn't care as much for her when I was there because she really put a lot of pressure on me, but I was fascinated by her. She was just really brilliant. And again, studied classical languages and was also my English teacher. And I had her for 4 years of Latin, but she talked to me about Notre Dame. She loved Notre Dame and talked about her time there with all of her students, really. But I think I was just, when she talked about it, I felt like it was this glorious place somewhere. And I'll be honest, I thought it was in New York, because all great and glorious places are in New York, right? So I was shocked to find out it was in South Bend, Indiana. But I really enjoyed hearing her talk about it as this wonderful place. Like I said, she talked about the grotto, the lakes, sitting by the lake, and she was there as a master's student. So she was there, and she was a sister. So I think they had special privileges in terms of attending, even though women weren't even allowed when she was getting her master's degree. So,
thank you, Margaret.
Yes.
Very much. And Lisa Marie, you were actually the president of BCAC at one point or other at Notre Dame, and you were a major in government and philosophy. And your grandparents were absolutely elated when you were accepted at Notre Dame. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and about the truths of your experience as a student at Notre Dame?
Well, thank you very much. I'm from Sumter, South Carolina. I had no connection to Notre Dame. My grandparents who raised me, of course, had heard of Notre Dame, and were very proud when I was admitted. Early admission, I think I found out October or November or something of my senior year in high school. I got into Notre Dame and I got into Spelman. Those were the 2 colleges that I applied to, very different institutions. And it was really that infamous trip to visit Notre Dame spring of that year that really cemented my decision. I think at the time, I wanted to go someplace that was really different and apart from where my classmates were going to school in the region, like in the Southeast. So when I arrived at Notre Dame in the fall of '84, there were about 10 Black women in my class. And although I had checked the box to move into Lewis Hall, where I understood all the Black women lived, I ended up in Walsh. And I was the only Black woman in the dorm. And, you know, when I reflect back on my time at Notre Dame, I'm very proud to have gone to Notre Dame. But it's undeniable that there were challenges for Black students during the 80s and in the years to follow. One, by virtue of the fact that there were so few of us, and that presented social challenges. And also, you know, sort of just the racial times that we were living in. When I reflect back on it now and realize, you know, we're only 15 years away from MLK being killed and the struggles in the civil rights era in the 60s, by the time you fast forward to the mid 80s. And so things weren't as progressive, and people's attitudes towards racial minorities weren't what they are today, even though we realize in the times we live in now that there still remains much work to be done. But I think the thing that I just like to be candid about that in terms of my experiences as a Black woman at Notre Dame, because I think sometimes we sort of wax eloquent a little bit about things as we look back on history and reflect upon all the good times, and sometimes, you know, don't mention the struggles and the difficulty of feeling accepted and of feeling at home at a place like Notre Dame, where that was so overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. And I just feel it's important to put that out there, especially for current students who may be feeling isolated or feeling challenged by the environment, because it is a difficult one. It can be a difficult one. It also can be a place where you have wonderful memories and experiences. It is certainly a place that fueled my desire to want to become a lawyer, and the professors and folks that I met at Notre Dame, including Professor Derek Bell, who was introduced to me by Father Ted Hesburgh at a civil rights conference. Derek Bell was the first Black professor at Harvard Law School. And I met him when I was a senior at Notre Dame. And as a result of meeting Derek Bell, that's how I ended up going to law school and going to NYU, where he taught for the last 20 years of his career. And so when I think about all of the things that Notre Dame means to me, there are so many wonderful, fond memories. It was a life-changing experience. I had the opportunity to meet so many wonderful friends, get an amazing education. It directed my path going forward, so I have absolutely no regrets. But at the same time, it was a challenging environment.
Lisa, thank you. And talking about good friends, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about two white friends that you made at the University of Notre Dame, they being Christy Conklin and Katie Conboy. Could you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, Christy Conklin, whose father, Dick Conklin, was the director of communications at Notre Dame for many years. I met her my first week at Notre Dame. She lived in Walsh Hall. And I just thought she was, you know, a little bit of a rebel. It was expected that her and her two brothers would go to Notre Dame, of course, because her family had such deep connections there. And but I think that she had been around Notre Dame her whole life and maybe was like a little like, okay, been there, done that, with all the things that as freshmen we were in awe of. She was a very progressive, interesting, dynamic person, and really the first one of my first friends at Notre Dame. And in fact, we're still friends to this day. I was in her wedding. She got married in Ireland a couple of years ago, and I went to the wedding. And then I just saw her 3 weeks ago in San Diego, because she recently moved to California. And over the years, we found ourselves living in the same cities, in New York, in Washington, D.C., and now in California. And so it was just such an unlikely friendship in so many ways. This person who, you know, came to Notre Dame, had been indoctrinated, had been around the university her whole life. Her father was an administrator, a person whose privilege and position you might have thought would not, might cause some impediments to her understanding what my experiences were. But we had such a wonderful connection. I learned so much more about Notre Dame from her, her father, her family, and it's a friendship that's endured over the years. And then Katie Conboy, I mentioned in my essay. So my first class, my freshman year, was a freshman lit class. I walked in, there were like 20 white guys and me. There weren't even any other women in the class. And the class was taught by this instructor named Katie Conboy, who as I recall, was probably one of the only few female instructors that I had at Notre Dame. But we had this unspoken alliance because here we were, the only two women like in this class. And it was one of my favorite classes freshman year. I learned so much from her. I have no idea where she is now, but I just think that she is somebody who I thought was so courageous and inspiring and such a role model to me in that situation.
Lisa, thank you so much. And we may get back to you because you have an interesting, it's not a story, it's a truth about one of our alumnus, and that's Demetrius Du Bois. And I hope we have time for that. But before we do that, Don, you had a very insightful question that we conferred in preparation for today. And you want to put this question out to all of our guests here, contributors.
Yeah.
What is that question?
Well, I wanted to react to something that Margaret said. Actually, it impressed itself on me when I read a Facebook post of yours a few weeks ago about your experience as compared with some of the experiences of students you're hearing of now, Black students at Notre Dame, that you felt, well, as you put it in your essay, Notre Dame people lived the gospel and you were welcomed and embraced and all. And it saddens you that students you hear of now are not. Talk about that a little bit, if you would, Margaret. And I'd like to hear others on that as well.
I will tell you that I've actually had a conversation about this with my sister, other alum, Lisa Johnson and I talked about this. And I wondered out loud, because I also have a son who attended Notre Dame. He graduated in 2014. I wondered if perhaps it was the fact that we had such a presence from the BCAC at that time, and there were parties that the Black students could attend. Again, there seemed to be a lot more support. We did so much together, the BCAC, when I was there. And I heard that shortly after I left, and maybe actually it even started my senior year, they stopped having those parties. They stopped getting together as much. And I'm wondering if that had something to do with the fact that students felt like they didn't belong at Notre Dame. I do recall the experience of the Black tables in the dining hall. And certainly if I went into lunch without a partner, I could go to the Black table, so to speak, at North Dining Hall and feel like I had a place to sit. So there was a lot of support for Black students and there was a certain unity. My son's talked about how, the Black football players in his class didn't so much become a part of that Black cultural group. He felt, of course he was in ZOM and he felt like that was more of a frat opportunity there. But his experience was very different from mine. Mine, I felt like I was welcome there as a Black student. And I also wonder if, this had something to do with the coaches, and whether or not they encouraged the students to actually, integrate more with the community and the groups. I mean, we had 3 coaches there when I was there. I think we started with Divine, we had Faust, and then we had Lou Holtz. So I'm just not sure what was going on and why there was such a difference. Eleanor and I talked about this as well, that her experience was very similar to mine, very positive. And she also felt very supported. And I want to say, not everything was great. There were a couple of incidents that I could have talked about with individuals. I mean, there will always be certain individuals there who will, certainly take a racist tone or, ask questions about why would you ever want to identify yourself as Black? I actually had someone ask me that. It's like, that's who I am. Why wouldn't I? But so that happened. It was an individual and I let it go. because I'm from the South, so those kind of things happen all the time. So.
Well, Don, you might ask, who would you like to ask to respond to your question again? I'll tell everybody we have about 5 minutes to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Anybody, actually. Phyllis, if you would.
Yeah. So, and refresh my what you mentioned, Don, was the question, because I think it had to do with why there's a difference, why there's a different experience today than there was back then. Yeah, and I don't know if it was so much a different experience as it is just a lot of different things that are happening around us. You know, the world's different. We've had, you know, generations of kids who are different. And I think that, you know, without really trying to pick it apart and analyze it, you know, I think the same kind of structures are in place in terms of a support network, even an unspoken support network, and if not a greater support network today. Now, as I, you know, I'm looking from my view as a trustee member and being plugged into a lot of what's going on with faculty and staff and students. And if you just pan the whole university, I think there's a lot of great stuff that's happening. It's happening differently than it happened for us as Black students, but there are a lot of really, really positive things going on. And you would think that with communication as it is, that the picture would be a little bit clearer, you know. So I really think it's more external elements that have kind of impacted what's going on there for students than it is maybe internally. And so I believe that, you know, it has a little bit to do with just a heightened sensitivity and awareness that a lot of students today have about some of the things going on in the world that are impacting, you know, how folks are treated and how people treat each other there. So it's a lot of extenuating factors that make for a different experience and a different perception of the experience. Right. That's just kind of my view, but you know, but a lot of what's happening is very similar to a lot of what happened when we were there. The bigger question for me is how do you shift that so that it doesn't feel like it's history repeating itself, in terms of you know, people graduating, Blacks graduating, feeling like, you know, they were maybe shortchanged in a little bit, a few ways. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Can I put one more question to everybody, and that is, since this is an alumni association shared read, alumni group shared read, what does it mean to you to be a Notre Dame alumnus? You've all been out for many years now, and what's it meant? Lisa, would you start us?
It's meant recently a lot of people asking me about Lou Holtz's appearance at the RNC and endorsing Trump. I don't think I could leave this conversation without mentioning how incredibly disappointing that was. And to have him question Joe Biden's faith as a Catholic, when from everyone's account, President Trump doesn't seem to have a moral compass or any spiritual or religious foundation, or certainly not a Catholic one. But I can't tell you how many people reached out to me in disappointment, really, because here Lou Holtz is someone who's made his career on the backs of Black male athletes, both at Notre Dame and the University of South Carolina. So it's kind of a twofer for me, since I'm from South Carolina also. You know, that was incredibly hurtful to me as a Black alumni to see Lou Holtz endorsing one of the, I would say undeniably, the most racially divisive president we've ever had in our nation's history. And I just could not let the moment pass without mentioning that, because here we are in the midst of not just this global pandemic, but a moment of racial awakening and reckoning with the murder of George Floyd. And thank you very much for mentioning Demetrius DuBose, who was a 1992 alumni of Notre Dame, co-captain of the football team, who played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and was murdered by the San Diego police in 1999. And John Corus, a 96 white alumni, is making a documentary about the murder of Demetrius DuBose. And so one of our own Notre Dame Black alumni was the victim of police violence and murder. And so I feel like this moment is going to teach us a lot. There are many blessings amidst the tragedy and a lot of change and things unfolding, and we'll look back on 2020 and hopefully it feels different to me this time that there really will be racial progress and racial justice. And that's what I hope comes out of this very painful year.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And Keith, your remarks, and then we're going to have to wrap this up.
Okay, so wow, it's great. I feel like my dad, the last person with the mic, right?
There you go.
So anyway, what I want to say to those people that are reading the book, first, I'm very proud to be an alumnus of Notre Dame, and my father was very proud to be an alumnus of Notre Dame. There was, you know, and I encourage you to read the history of his experience there and his relationship with Father Hesburgh and my subsequent relationship. But what I love about this book is that people will see that one Black experience does not fit all. And I think that's so very important, because people want to group the Black experience or make assumptions about it. And we are different and we've had different experiences. But I will say, and that's why this is such an important book, for people to understand people of color. And for me, I always felt included. Margaret, my experience was much like yours. I always felt included from the time I walked on campus to the time I left. So it was a beautiful experience. But what has broken my heart is to read and hear and see that people have not had that. To say that it's a great place to be from, but not a great place to be at, hurts. And I don't think we should look for condemnation. I think we should look for opportunity. There's an opportunity for us to be better, an opportunity for us to be more inclusive. And I've been encouraged. I've been hosting a series of critical conversations with some of my classmates since the George Floyd murder. And this is mostly white classmates, and I've been a facilitator, and their hearts are broken too. And they want to learn more, and they're doing things. So I want to encourage people to read it. I want to encourage people to reach out to more Black people and more Black alums. Some of the people I've been with said, "You're my first Black friend I ever had in my life." I said, "That's great. Just don't let me be the last one you have in your life," right? So, you know, let's reach out and do some more. And I will continue to bear the standard of Notre Dame and to lend my voice for inclusion and for improvement. And I'm honored, and thank you all for letting me be part of this.
Well, on that note, for sure, we're on a high note here. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. Yes, we could keep talking about this, and maybe there will be other opportunities. And Don, I think you'll agree that maybe we need to have even an extra session to develop some of the stories that we heard, particularly about Demetrius. And look at that photo.
It's me and Dad back in the day.
All right. So definitely read Tom Hawkins' essay. And once again, thank you, everybody. And we'll see you down the line.